four foundations of mindfulness, the Kayagata Sutta, and it elaborates on it. And although you don't have a copy of it because we didn't make photographs of it, I think it's important enough to discuss this particular discourse of the Buddha, and maybe at some stage we can also let you have a photocopy of it. It's called the Kayagata Sutta. Now the word sati is mindfulness again, and kaya is the body, and gata means gone to. So gone to the body, mindfulness sutta. It's translated as mindfulness of the body, but literally translated it means gone to the body, mindfulness sutta. And it starts out with, thus have I heard again, and on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's Park. This is an interesting spot. It can be found today. It is one of the spots that one visits when one does a pilgrimage to the Buddhist places in India. It's what we find there are ruins of the kutis made out of bricks. One of them is purported to have been the Buddha's one, and the name of it is Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's Park. Now, Jeta was a prince, and Anathapindika was the multimillionaire, which I think I have mentioned him earlier. He was determined to make a monastery for the Buddha, and he went all over the place trying to find a suitable place, and he finally found a mango grove who belonged to Prince Jeta. It wasn't for sale, but Anathapindika, first of all, being very rich and very determined, thought he'd just go and inquire. So he asked Prince Jeta whether he'd like to sell it to him, and Prince Jeta said no, wasn't interested. And he went a second time, and again Prince Jeta wasn't interested. And the third time when he went, Prince Jeta probably thought, we don't know this, but one imagines, that he thought, well, there's this millionaire, and he's determined to buy this place of mine, this real estate. Well, maybe if I ask a huge sum, either he's going to become discouraged or he'll pay it. So he said, well, if you cover every inch of ground with a golden coin, I'll sell you the place. And Anathapindika said, all right. So he asked his servants to bring wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of golden coins to cover the ground of this substantial piece of real estate. It's not a small place at all. I've seen it, I've been there. And in the end, Anathapindika ran out of golden coins, and there was a piece left, possibly the size of this room. And so Prince Jeta said, well, I'll give you a discount. So he got his monastery. This was the first monastery that the Buddha ever had. Until then, he'd been a wanderer. Prince Jeta was not at all a Buddhist, but he became a bit curious about this immense expenditure that this Anathapindika had gone into to secure this place for the Buddha. So he came along to a few talks of the Buddha and also became convinced that this was truth. And he donated sort of an archway for the entrance for this monastery. So it's quite an interesting story about Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's Park. This place was always called Anathapindika's Park or Anathapindika's Monastery, and to this day it's called that because he donated it. He was the great donor. And then we have an explanation how the bhikkhus were together, and it's quite interesting because it gives us a bit of insight into their ways of dealing with things. A number of bhikkhus were sitting in the assembly hall. One should think that that would be like a meditation hall, where they had met together on return from their alms round after their meal was over. Meanwhile, it was being said among them, "It is wonderful, friends, it is marvelous how mindfulness of the body has been said by the Blessed One who knows and sees, Arahant and fully enlightened, to be of great fruit, great benefit, when developed and repeatedly practiced." And then their talk, meanwhile, was left unfinished, for the Blessed One rose from meditation now when it was evening, and he came to the assembly hall and sat down on a seat made ready. In other words, he stopped talking when the Buddha came. When he had done so, he addressed the bhikkhus thus: "For what talk are you gathered here together now, bhikkhus? And what was your talk meanwhile which was left unfinished?" "Here, Venerable Sir, we were sitting in the assembly hall where we had met together on return from our alms round after our meal. Meanwhile, it was being said amongst us, 'It's wonderful, friends, it is marvelous how mindfulness of the body has been said by the Blessed One, who knows and sees, Arahant and fully enlightened, to be of great fruit, great benefit, when developed and repeatedly practiced.' This was our talk meanwhile, Venerable Sir, which was left unfinished, for then the Blessed One arrived." And now this sutta is a complete repetition of the first sutta which we have studied on the ways of practicing mindfulness of the body. Exactly the same thing again. However, it is important to recognize and realize that the Buddha found the mindfulness of the body particularly important. For instance, there is a saying in another discourse in the Anguttara Nikaya, where he says, "Bhikkhus, they do not savor the deathless who do not savor mindfulness of the body. They savor the deathless who savor mindfulness of the body." The word deathless is just another synonym for nibbana. Without mindfulness altogether, we do not have direction for the mind. We allow the mind to do what it pleases. Now, some people have intelligent minds, and some people have easily concentrated minds, and yet even those people are at the mercy of their minds unless they practice self-control and discipline their minds. Because a mind that is not trained and disciplined will do what it pleases. And we call a mind a magician. It can pull a rabbit out of any hat. It makes up stories about anything. So no matter what kind of mind we have, whether it is one which is imaginative, which has a lot of visions, which is intelligent, which is slow, which is fast, which is concentrated, which is not concentrated, doesn't matter. All minds have to practice mindfulness. Otherwise we do not have that guideline and that constancy in the mind which always brings us back to what is important. So here the Buddha makes an extra emphasis, puts extra emphasis on the fact that it should be mindfulness of the body. Now obviously, watching the breath is also mindfulness of the body, and that's how this sutta again starts out, mindfulness of the breath. And this is why watching the breath is a traditional way of the meditative practice. However, it is important to know and important to remember, and I have said these things before, but I will repeat them because I do know that the human memory is notoriously short and not exact, that no matter what kind of method we use, a method is a method by any name. We use the breath, and the Buddha recommends using the breath, but that doesn't mean that that's the only recommendation he has. There is another sutta where he gives a description of 40 different meditation subjects, one of them being the breath. Now, we have already come across quite a number of other meditation subjects which are directed towards insight, which are repeated here again. I won't read them again because we have read them, and you do have that photocopy anyway, where we have the elements, where we have the 9 charnel grounds, where we have the movements that we make, and we have the bits and pieces that we consist of, the bodily parts. All these are meditation subjects geared towards insight. However, that does not mean that one cannot become concentrated and quite calm when using any of them. It is possible, for instance, that one uses any one of these that I've just mentioned and gets some insight into one's own body through them, and because of that, calm arises. And this is exactly what happens in the sutta. So again, coming back to what I started out to say, a method is a method by any name. It will never be anything else except a method. But we have the Buddha to thank for that he is the one who has been instrumental and able to give us methods. Without methods, we would never know what to do. And that not only has he given us the methods, that he has also given us the explanation what happens when we use the methods correctly. So we can be extremely grateful for that. It is, although the practice of many of these things can be found in other disciplines, nowhere can there be found such an exact explanation in all detail. And coming back to a method is a method, I like to compare the method to a key. Now, you've all heard me say that, but I like to repeat it because I consider it very important. If you want to unlock a door and you want to fit the key into the keyhole, you have to hold the key steady long enough to make it fit into the keyhole. That's holding on to the breath steady long enough. You fit it into the keyhole and you unlock the door, and you are in a mansion with 8 chambers. Obviously, once you've unlocked the door for that session, you certainly don't need the key again. You may need it next time if you slammed the door shut. Having unlocked the door often enough, it usually stays open. One doesn't have to use the key again. But that comes from practice. And that comes from a disciplined mind, a mind that has, as I've mentioned before, recollected how it got into that mansion with the 8 chambers, so that it has a very definite pathway and doesn't have to search around in the dark. So it starts out with the mindfulness of the body on the breath, again, as we have already heard and done, which doesn't mean we can't be mindful of something else, and it then mentions all those that I have already mentioned a moment ago. But here, as a different paragraph, rather than the inside one that we knew in the first sutta, where it was mentioned about the impermanence and watching the breath just as breath, it says this: as he abides thus diligent, ardent, and self-controlled, there we are, self-controlled, his memories and intentions based on the household life are abandoned. Now, this concerns monks and nuns who have left the household life. However, in a retreat situation such as this is what needs to be abandoned. Memories and ideas based on the household life. Anything that's got to do with one's ordinary way of life, all of that is detrimental to meditation. Who am I telling this to? It's got to be abandoned. It has no bearing on anything. Memories and intentions based on the household life are abandoned. With their abandoning, the mind becomes settled in itself, quieted, brought to singleness and concentrated. So, simple, isn't it? That's what everybody wants. So abandon the rest. That is how a bhikkhu develops mindfulness of the body. Not just a bhikkhu, anybody. These happen to be suttas, discourses of the Buddha to the bhikkhus. That's why he's saying bhikkhu, but naturally it concerns any meditator. Their household life is concerned with many details and many memories and many wishes and many ideas and plans and hopes and regrets and desires and all the rest of it. And if we have that going, we can't get settled and concentrated. So the first thing is the breath, the second thing is the bodily movements, and of all kinds. And then the parts of the body. And again, this particular little paragraph which I've just read about the abandoning the intentions and memories is between each of those different methods. Then we have the elements. Then we have the charnel ground, all the different charnel grounds, 9 of them. I shall not tractate your mind with those again. Blood and sinews, fleshless skeletons, hand bones and foot bones, and so on. I'm just trying to find the end of this story. So now having done any one of those, not necessarily all of them, any one of them, and the mind has become settled and quieted, brought to singleness and concentrated, with the memories and intentions based on the household life abandoned, then bhikkhus, quite secluded from sensual desires, secluded from unprofitable dhammas, he enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by initial and sustained application with happiness and pleasure born of seclusion. The first piece of interest here is that the jhanas can arise from inside meditation, because every one of these methods, except watching the breath, are inside methods. So it doesn't matter what one does, as long as one gets there. So if the mind, for instance, is very quiet and still to start out with, and feels happily concentrated and has abandoned all the other stuff that's out there, certainly one can watch the breath and immediately enter into pleasant sensation. But if the mind is unruly, and doesn't want to stay on the breath, doesn't want to do anything maybe. Sometimes the mind just doesn't want to do anything. It just says, oh, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to get enlightened anyway, so what's the use, or something like that. That's the time to pick any one of these insight methods. Any one of them. And you've got them all. If you haven't even written them down, they're all in that first sutta, Satipatthana Sutta, which you have a copy. Any one of them. Doesn't matter. And if the mind is actually interested enough to investigate whichever one of the methods you have chosen, it will eventually come to one point. And as it does that, we have this aspect secluded from sensual desire. Obviously, when we're concentrated, we don't have sensual desires. Secluded from unprofitable Dhammas. What does that mean? What does unprofitable Dhammas mean? Yeah, and unprofitable?
Negative thoughts.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it is. Right. So we're secluded from sensual desires and we're secluded from negative thinking, right? So we've got concentrated on whatever it is. Maybe we've got concentrated on our own skeleton. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. He enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by initial and sustained application. Well, the initial application is the method, right? Getting the mind going on whichever method we have chosen. That's our initial application to the meditation subject. And the sustained application means we can stay on it. With happiness and pleasure born of seclusion. Now, instead of saying that it's rapture or delight, it says happiness and pleasure. We can use the word pleasure here so that we don't get confused with the happiness which comes later. And the word seclusion again means that the mind is secluded. It doesn't mean you have to sit in a cave, but you're very welcome to do so. There are caves down here, and you are welcome to use them and sit as secluded as you can make it. But it doesn't mean that. It means secluded from sensual desire. It means that the mind is in its proper place. Now, one of the things which we have to learn through meditation, and I'm sure everybody learns that, is that we can actually direct the mind. We don't have to accept it the way it is. Because if we were to have to accept it the way it is, we wouldn't be able to become purified. We wouldn't be able to become enlightened. If we were to accept the way it is and never change it to where we want it to be, then the whole path would be blocked. It's not an automatic evolution, although some people have thought like that. It is a deliberate practice. It's an important point which is sometimes misunderstood. Is this quite clear? Okay. So we have this seclusion, we have the initial and sustained application. Now, again, it's of interest to know, I think I have mentioned it already, but I'll mention it again, that the initial application is our remedy for sloth and torpor. Again and again we put the mind on the meditation subject, no matter what it may be, so that we do not get into the inertia, the one that was mentioned in yesterday's sutta, where we had 11 imperfections of the mind, which obviously all block the successful meditation, one of them being inertia. initial application is the counteraction for that. Just sitting there and doing it. And if the mind doesn't want to keep on saying, come on, do it, this is the right time. In other words, give oneself a pep talk about it. And the sustained application is the factor which shows us that we can do it, which arouses confidence, which is the counteraction for that uncertainty which was mentioned yesterday as one of the 11 imperfections. And here we have the way to do it. Now, when the initial application on when any one of these inside methods has been used, and one has actually been able to stay on it, the sustained application, to then switch from that to the factor, to the pleasure factor in the first jhana, the initial application will be very minor. It will only be that moment of switch when the pleasant sensation happens. It is the sustained application which is then of much greater importance. So we have here the initial application, which is all of the breath, and then the sustained application, which stays on the breath, but which will then have to be switched over to the, in the first jhana, pleasant sensation, which is mentioned as pleasure here. It's just a matter of translation. Clear? All clear? All right. Yes.
The people that don't teach or talk about the jhana, how is that word pleasant?
I wouldn't have a clue. I don't know what they're doing. People who don't teach jhanas, I don't know. I never ask other people what they're teaching. They're also polite enough not to ask me. So we're just sort of having a superficial conversation, I suppose. It's happening. All right. First jhana is quite clear, pleasant sensation. So in another discourse, which we may come across later, 81. It's this one, isn't it? 81. Just a minute, I have to look at the number. No, it's 85. The Buddha says, this is a pleasure I will allow myself, the jhanas, right? So now, having got that far, the Buddha now explains how one deals with this. Having got to the first jhana, now how do we deal with it? And he gives a very nice simile for it, which is totally without any application to our lives anymore. Such things do not exist anymore, but yet it makes it quite clear what he's talking about. He explains what happens in the first jhana. He makes happiness and pleasure born of seclusion, drench, steep, fill, and extend throughout his whole body. So this already gives one an indication that this is a physical sensation, right? Goes out through the whole body. So that there is nothing of his whole body to which the happiness and pleasure born of seclusion do not extend. Now comes the metaphor, the simile. Just as a skilled bathman or bathman's apprentice heaps bath powder in a metal basin and sprinkling it gradually with water, kneads it up till the moisture wets his ball of bath powder, soaks it, and extends over it within and without, though it does not itself become liquid. So too a bhikkhu makes happiness and pleasure born of seclusion, drench, steep, fill, and extend throughout his whole body, so that there is nothing of his whole body to which the happiness and pleasure born of seclusion do not extend. Now this is a bit of interest there, because this is what apparently one used to do when one took a bath. One took bath powder, put it in a metal basin, and sprinkled it gradually with water, and then had to knead it until the moisture wet this ball of bath powder and soaked it and extended through it, but did not itself become liquid. So the bath powder would not become liquid, but it would just be completely soaked with water. One could think maybe also of flour that one makes into dough. This would be more common with us than bath powder that we were needing. So, but it's the same idea. So it's I always find these historical references, how people used to live in those days, of interest, because it makes sort of gives us a connection to it, what was going on then. So this has to drench one completely, yeah? Any questions on this? Quite clear.
Which jhana is this? The first
one?
And I'm confused. Initial and sustained application are separate from the 8 jhanas, or
that's how you start. You've got to sit down and do it. That's initial application. Okay. Sustained application means you're staying on the breath.
Okay.
Right?
Then
and then
that, when the pleasure comes.
Yeah. But this is always said, that initial and sustained application as part of the first jhana.
Okay, so it's all part of it.
Yes. Yeah. And again, we have that same paragraph. They don't reprint it. I have to go back to it. After the jhana comes a paragraph, as he abides thus diligent, ardent and self-controlled, his memories and intentions based on the household life are abandoned. Now, of course, having the first jhana, it's a little easier to abandon those because you've got something else, which is far preferable. With the abandoning, his mind becomes settled in himself, quieted, brought to singleness and concentrated. This is how a bhikkhu develops mindfulness of the body. So even though now we are in the jhanas, Buddha still talks about mindfulness of the body. Now, again, bhikkhus, with the stilling of initial and sustained application, he enters upon and abides in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind, without initial application and without sustained application, with happiness and pleasure born of concentration. You can maybe already imagine what it's like when you try to go through this without a teacher and try to understand what it's all about. Because it says the same thing over and over again, but it doesn't mean the same thing. Now in the second jhana, of course, the initial application is no longer necessary because you're concentrated now. And the sustained application is also no longer necessary because the mind is already in that field, so to say. It's already entered upon the a switch in consciousness. So he goes to second jhana, and second jhana brings self-confidence and a singleness of mind. In other words, in the second jhana, the mind is, of course, much more strongly concentrated, but it brings self-confidence. And it doesn't have the initial and the sustained application, and it has happiness in it. Because the first one was called pleasure. Again, it would have been better if it had been translated as the pleasure of the sensations, the physical sensations, or the rapture of the physical sensations. And this one here, the happiness of the emotion, joy. Right? Now, the important part of the second one, and that's why one should not skip it, not let the mind skip over it, is first of all the discipline of the mind. One only becomes master of the jhanas when one can do every one of them at will, at any time. Go from 1 to 4, from 4 to 8, from 8 to 6, from 6 down to 2, And that is only possible if one has initially done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not missed out on any of them. Obviously they become more and more refined as we go along, and yet each one has a particular purpose. The first one, where I had already explained what initial and sustained application does for us. However, the rapture, the delight, the piti, physical sensation, counteracts our ill will. It's impossible to have ill will when one feels well. Now, not only does it do that during the meditation period, it always has a residue. Every state of mind that we ever have had has had a residue. Any state of mind that we now have has a residue. They're all residual bits and pieces within, which sometimes come up through memory. So this has a residue, and it gives us also an insight, a very simple one, which most people never pay attention to. Namely, the fact that when we feel well, we can't be angry. So anyone who is angry, has hate and ill will, must not be feeling well. So, compassion. No use to have anger then at that angry person or upset person. They can't be feeling well, because we have already noticed within ourselves that when we really have this delightful sensation, it's impossible to be angry. And only when we have had this personal experience do we know it. Until then, we can agree to it, but only when we do it ourselves are we fully convinced. And that's why we need to go into every one of these steps. Now the first one, obviously, and this is not mentioned here, but it is mentioned in the Visuddhimagga, which is a path of purification, not by the Buddha, but by the Buddhaghosa from the 5th century. It is mentioned like this, that when we have experienced the first one, which has this pleasant sensation, we are quite easily convinced that this is still a gross state, that we are not meditating for the purpose of pleasant sensation, and are therefore willing and eager to give it up in preference for the pleasant emotion, which is joy. So although this pleasant sensation is still around, it doesn't just disappear and change into joy, we are quite willing to let go of it so that we can experience the joy. To experience the joy which is emotional is a logical cause and effect progression. When there is this delightful sensation within the body, with drenching us from head to toe, obviously we must feel joy. There's no other way we could possibly feel. In the second jhana, people often have the sensation as if they're smiling. In fact, they feel sometimes they come out of it on purpose because they think I must be looking terribly stupid because I'm smiling like this. But in reality, it is more an inner smile than an outer smile. I have never yet seen anybody look stupid who was in second jhana. It's a sort of a relaxed look. So with the second one, we have joy. Now, that is important for many reasons, and that's why we shouldn't skip any of these things. Also, if we want to really perfect this and have it at our disposal at any time, all of them need to be there, and they are all there. It's just that sometimes the mind becomes impatient and says, oh, I don't want all these pleasant feelings. That's not what I'm here for. I want to be enlightened. So I want to go deeper, and I want to go deeper, and a little deeper yet, and skips on these along those steps. and does not experience them. That's not a wise thing to do. First of all, impatience is never wise. Joy has a very distinctive result, that inner joy. It brings the insight of knowing that whatever is out there in the world, it cannot compare to that what's inside of oneself. We no longer have to search for that stuff that they've supposedly got out there that we could have if we had enough money or enough time or enough energy or enough intelligence to find it. We no longer have to look. We've got something within that is of much greater import and impact on us and has a totally different result. Because what's outside is based on sense contact, and what's inside is based on concentration. And sense contact is not under our jurisdiction, whereas concentration is. It's still a condition, but at least it is a condition which we ourselves can arouse. We are no longer victim to the prevailing circumstances, the outer conditions. We are only victim to our unruly mind, and there we've got a say in the matter. I'm waiting for the bookkeeping to... It's all right. Now with that joy, because it is, so to say, self-generated, self-confidence arises. This is not a feeling of superiority or importance. That's not self-confidence. Self-confidence is a feeling of being able to be independent. Only a person who is independent can be self-confident. As long as we are dependent on other people, on outer conditions, on anything at all that we consider the important to keep, so long we are a slave to that particular condition, no matter what it is. The minute we see that our joy arises independently, whether we have a good job, whether we've got a good husband or a good wife, whether we even got good food, whether we've got a good house, it makes absolutely no difference. All we have to do is have some good concentration, and it does arise. We have an independence of the world, and it can no longer attack us in the way it has done in the past. It has, obviously it still will have impact on us, but it doesn't have the same sting to it anymore. As if we had grown a bit of a shield around us, which is not to say that that shields our loving kindness and compassion. On the contrary, the loving kindness and compassion grows in equal proportion to that independence, because we can now see the difference which we were experiencing before we had that, and now we know the before and after. So knowing the before and after, our compassion for those who only know the before until now has of course grown. Quite clear, or any questions? Although the Buddha makes the strongest possible case for the jhanas over and over again, I still feel called upon to strengthen the case. Because for the simple reason that his explanations are extremely short, and he does not go into elaborate detail on them. Although he mentions them over and over again. There are, especially in the middle length sayings, which these are, Majjhima Nikaya, 3 volumes, but not all of them in there actually. Innumerable suttas that contain them. The exact explanation can be found in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, where it is in very, very minute detail. The Buddha does not go into this enormous detail. Now again, he gives a simile for the experience of the second jhana, which is also very nice and helpful to know and read, because sometimes when one is not very used to them yet or not proficient at them, one may be at in doubt how should one deal with it. Now, he makes, I'm just going to say happiness. He makes happiness born of concentration, drench, steep, fill and extend throughout this body, and there's nothing of just so there were a lake, waters welled up from below, having no inflow from east, west, north or south, nor yet replenished from time to the sky with showers. Then the cool fount of water welling up in the lake would make the cool water drench, steep, fill and extend throughout all the for happiness, born of concentration, drench, steep, fill and extend throughout this body, so that there's nothing of this whole body to which the happiness born of concentration does not extend. The simile of the lake, which has no inflow from east, west, north or south, no inlets, and doesn't have any rain coming in, gives us the picture, the visual picture of the joy, the happiness arising from within, nothing coming at us from anywhere. It doesn't come through eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body or mind. It just comes from the concentration and arises out of that. There is no outer inflow, outer input into the joy that we experience. That's the lake. It has no openings anywhere. And again, the joy, the happiness should extend throughout the body. Now, that's also interesting, because very often people experience this joy coming from the spiritual heart, sort of the middle of the chest, like thing. In order to make the second jhana complete, that feeling of joy should extend from head to foot, according to the Buddha's instructions, and it would also make it more complete, because it would be a stronger aspect. Now, obviously, sometimes also the rapture, the physical, and the emotional joy, both of them are mild, and other times they are strong. It doesn't matter. It's naturally, the better the concentration, the stronger they get. The self-confidence is an important aspect, and the letting go of the searching for joy outside of us. But there's another important result from the joy of the meditation. The residue. The residue which is retained in the mind of a buoyant and joyful interior being. It's very difficult to become depressed. In fact, I should think it's impossible when you can do the jhanas. I couldn't imagine that that is possible. I've never yet met anybody who has managed that, because it is the exact opposite. It is also much easier not to worry and not to fear. All these are counteracted by the joy of the second jhana. All quite clear, or some questions? Yes.
If what is in refers to the second jhana, and one can feel that one is getting pushed out towards discursive thinking and coming out of it, and concentration is diminishing, it would be natural to try to do say the breath, get in or go up
Well, it would be all right to do that if it's really necessary. A person who has practiced Dhamma for some time wouldn't need that. One could push the mind back into the Dhamma state without having to do that. However, if the mind is very unruly and the Dhammas have not been practiced very long, yes, one might have to go back to the practice. Depends entirely upon how trained the mind is already. And also, for the same person, different situations may occur. And in one sitting, they may have to go back to the breath because it just won't work any other way. But another time, all they have to do is just have a little push behind the mind and it just goes right back in. Either way. Anything else? Oh, quite clear.
When you say the joy and happiness extend over the body, is that because both are present, the present physical sensation and the joy at the same time? The progression?
Actually, that is so. The physical sensation is still present, but the mind needs to attend to the emotional sensation, the emotional feeling of joy. Otherwise, we're going to get off the first one into the second one. And what the Buddha is describing here is more an experience where the joyfulness, well, I doubt very much that you're going to feel it in your big toe, but where the joyfulness is not so limited that you just feel it here and nowhere else. It's more that you can feel it as if your whole being is joyful. The attention has to be on the emotional feeling and not on the sensation. The sensation supports the emotional feeling, and it's still there. It supports it.
What you think about getting depressed, which is not possible?
Well, I don't think it's possible.
You know it.
I don't think it's possible for anyone who has any proficiency in the jhanas, in other words, can go back to it, would have any way of having a mind that gets depressed.
But if someone would go out in the world again and not being able to get into the jhana.
Oh yeah, then it could get very depressed.
Yes. Well.
Especially depressed because they get more depressed than anybody else because they already know what they could do and now they can't. And it's always a very a difficult thing. But you see, there's another consolation for that. If one has once been able to do them and understands how to get in, well, this is an absolute necessity, how to understand how to get in, and practices every day, there's no way you're going to lose it. But these are the ifs. If you know how to get in and if you practice every day, there's no way to lose it. Because it is a faculty of the mind, just like you've never lost doing the additions and subtractions in your mind. You can still do that. Learned it many years ago, at least I learned it many years ago. I can still do it. It's just a faculty of the mind. So one has to know how to do it. right? Once you know how to do it, and you don't completely give it up, there's no way you're going to lose it. But it has to be practiced. It's not something you can just let go. Yes?
When the mind is being purified, does it suffer from the similar kind of symptoms as when the body is? Like traditionally when the body is being purified, it tends to, maybe unpleasant things that come out in the body as a result of the purification process. Does this happen with the mind too?
Well, what do you call the purification of mind in this instance?
Well, by practicing the jhanas.
No.
It has been said that is a purification of mind.
That's a purification of mind through the concentration. No, what happens is you can compare physical fasting, where sometimes the body, if it isn't used to this sort of thing, reacts with some unpleasantness. You can compare that to intensive meditation retreat where it's supposed to be quiet. That's mental fasting. And that can, if you don't practice the jhanas diligently, more than once or twice a day, that can create unpleasant feelings, yes. And that's why people run away from such things.
Yes. You see what I'm getting at about when the purification process is underway and things tend to come out that perhaps have been hidden for some time. When they come out, that's what I'm really asking. Is this a part of the characteristic of early meditation?
Well, it's not a characteristic of the jhanas, it's a characteristic of insight meditation.
Yeah.
Things do not come up from the jhanas, they come up from insight meditation.
Yes, yeah. Not during the jhanas, but
certainly
in
not.
everyday life, I mean.
Yes.
Coming out at other times.
Well, if one sees them coming up, something that one has hidden before, and one is able to observe it objectively and let it disappear again, one is most likely rid of it. But if one reacts to it with either delight or disgust, one starts all over again. The same circle again. The circular motion. I like it, I don't like it. Whatever, either way.
Right. Which is how it got hidden in the first place.
Yeah. Specifically, if we didn't like it.
Yeah.
We hide that away and we don't like it and we don't want to know about it, and let's just forget the whole thing. And then when it comes up and again we don't like it, same story over again. But if we can look at it and say, nothing but a mental concomitant of any one of the four kinds, it has arisen and it will again vanish, and we are totally objective towards it, and do not feel involved and identified with it, then we have let go of it. Anything else? I'll just go to the next one. Well, again, after the second jhana, he uses that same little paragraph about, as he abides thus diligent, ardent and self-controlled, his memories and intentions based on the household life are abandoned. With their abandoning, his mind becomes settled in himself, quieted, brought to singleness and concentrated. That is how a bhikkhu develops mindfulness of the body. Now, what is happening between each of the jhanas? Obviously, one abandons memories and intentions ever more, and so the mind becomes more quiet, more single-pointed, one-pointed, and more concentrated, so that the third and the next jhana can then arise. So this is, one could say, little paragraph of the transition. Now, when one does a jhana, some people are aware of transition, some people are not. Being aware of transition is fine, not being aware of them is also fine, it doesn't matter. The transition moment is mind moments. They're not of any length of time. The transition moment can be that the mind recognizes that it has been in one state and is now going to another. It's sort of moving towards. And that moving towards then falls into being in that state. Not everybody knows that, feels it, not necessary. But if so, also very good. Now, again, bhikkhus, with the fading as well of happiness, he abides in equanimity and mindful and fully aware, still feeling pleasure with the body, he enters upon and abides in the third jhana, on account of which the noble ones announce, he has a pleasant abiding, who has equanimity and is mindful. So with the third jhana, it starts to be a pleasant abiding. The first two are considered to be just the entry halls. You've got to get in there and sit down in the living room. Obviously, the first one is the entry hall, the piti, the rapture. The second one, sort of the study. And then the third one is the living room where you can actually sit down in a nice armchair and enjoy yourself. So that's a pleasant abiding. The fading away of the happiness, I like to use it as joy, fading away with joy, he abides in equanimity. Now the word equanimity is here used for the third one. I use it for the fourth one because it becomes too confusing. We have to have a bit more identification system. Our minds are used to identification systems, and unless we have that, we do not have the exactness of the practice. The practice has to be exact. It should never deteriorate into a potluck situation or a happy-go-lucky affair. This is a very distinct practice which has as its results elevated states of consciousness. So we need to know exactly what we're doing, which means we have to have the understood experience. If we have an experience and we don't understand it, it doesn't do us any good. So I like to say about this that it's a fading away of the joy and a contentment arises. So one is mindful and fully aware, and there's still pleasure with the body. Now, because the contentment is a more of a bland nature, it's totally bland. It doesn't have any of the joyfulness and the rapture of the first two. One is still aware in this state that the body feels very well, which in the fourth one completely disappears. However, the attention has to be on the contentment. There's another differentiation which one could mention here, and that is that rapture, the first one, joy, the second one, have a certain excitement with them, whereas the third one, the contentment, has a feeling as if the mind has fallen into a bit of a well. It's not a very deep well yet, but it has sort of gone down. It doesn't, of course, but the excitement has disappeared. And very often one has to do that deliberately because the mind has a sticky quality. Unfortunately, all unenlightened minds are sticky, which is upadana, which is our being stuck to, clinging. And we're clinging to all sorts of things. Of course, we're clinging to joy, especially if we haven't had much before that. We're going to cling to it like, So we might have to actually let go of it in order to fall into the contentment. Now the contentment, of course, arises in a logical progression because we got finally what we wanted. We wanted joy, so we got it, and now we're contented. At this stage, in the third one, we are not looking for anything. We are quite contented. And it is a state where the excitement of the first two has subsided. While the body is still feeling very well and has a pleasurable sensation, it is nothing compared to the first one, which was very strong. Here it's very, very mild. And just now he has a pleasant abiding. And again, here is a simile for what one should do with this state of affairs here. Now, and it is unfortunately translated, he makes pleasure. Can't do anything with that translation. Okay. He makes contentment, divested of happiness, drench, steep, fill and extend throughout the body, and there is nothing of his whole body to which the contentment, divested of happiness, does not extend. Just as in a water lily pond, or a white lotus pond, or a red lotus pond, some water lilies, or white lotuses, or red lotuses, are born under the water, grow under the water, do not stand up out of the water, flourish immersed under the water, and cool water drenches, steeps, fills, and extends throughout them, to their tips and to their roots, and there is nothing of the whole of those water lilies, those white lotuses, those red lotuses, to which the cool water does not extend. So too the bhikkhu makes contentment, divested of happiness, drench, steep, fill, and extend throughout this body, and there is nothing of his whole body to which contentment, divested of happiness, does not extend. The translator has used the words pleasure and happiness, which makes it so confusing that we can't really use it, because we've had that already in the second one. So we have to have this feeling that there is actually a difference, and it is quite marked in the practice of it. One can feel a difference. I sometimes compare that with going into a warm bathtub and being completely immersed in it and very contented, because it is a pleasurable situation. Now, that joy has made that contentment arise. The pleasurable situation has not totally vanished, but we do not put our attention on it. We put our attention on the contentment. So that's why it says here, divested of happiness, divested of pleasure, one should say, and he compares it, the Buddha compares it to the water lilies, which are growing under the water and are completely immersed in that water. Now, two things that are to be remembered, which are not mentioned here, and which are important to talk about and recognize: the fact that whenever one is finished with the meditation, not between each stage, but whatever stage one finishes at, whether one finishes at number 1, 2, or 3, doesn't matter, one recognizes the fading away of the pleasant state, even though it may not fade completely immediately, but one can thereby get a personal experience of impermanence, of pleasant states. We are perfectly happy to have unpleasant states disappear. No problem at all. We watch them with glee. But when the pleasant states disappear, that's when we have to become mindful. Now, when the mind has been very much concentrated and in these states which have been described, it does not mind watching the disappearance. It does not have any objection, because it feels contented. In the very first one, if one hasn't been in it long enough, the mind is apt to say, oh, what a pity, it's gone again. I wonder if I can get it back. Well, that's obviously clinging. and that is counterproductive to insight. The seeing of the impermanence without saying, oh, what a pity, I'd like to have it back, is much more productive of having the concentration and the stillness of mind to bring it back. And the third one is no problem. The mind's contented, it's going to look at anything and say, oh, well, that's okay. It's disappeared. The second step before opening the eyes is the recollection, the recap. How did I get in there? That cannot be stressed often enough. So that we have an established pathway where all we have to do is sit down and maybe a few breaths in order to unlock that door again, or the door remains open. If the door one day remains open, this can be done in the middle of Martin Square. No problem. If one wants to do it. And there may be occasions when one does. It doesn't mean, now in the very first one, just in the piti, in the delightful sensation, that doesn't mean that one doesn't function in the world. It's very simple to function even with that. In fact, it's much easier to function. The next two become a bit deeply engrossed, absorbed, and the functioning in the world would be impaired. So that's not very, not much, that's not to be recommended. So, but if we have our pathway, we will find our personal trigger. And whether that's breath, or whether that's a word, or whether it's a bodily posture, it can be a body posture, or whether it is having slept more or less, having eaten more or less, preferably probably less, whether it's a certain time of the day, all of these things have an influence. Some of the influence may be strong enough to make the jhanas arise. Some of the influences may just be weak. So therefore, if one hasn't found one's pathway yet, one has to consider all aspects which have anything to do with that particular meditation period when the jhana factors did arise. It may just be one of those situations which had any bearing on it, but we'll have to try that out until we find the one. Now, very often people can be triggered by a loving-kindness meditation. Some people who have devotion can be triggered by thinking of the Buddha and his wonderful teaching. Some people can be triggered by gratitude. Some people can be triggered by recognizing that all is impermanent. Some people can be triggered by sitting differently. Everybody has to find their personal trigger. Sometimes maybe the breath has to be done heavily, or sometimes the breath has to be done very lightly. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what kind of key one uses as long as one unlocks the door. None of the keys have to have any particular manifestation about them. They're all just as good as the next one. So that's the third one. We had the third one, yes. Okay. We'll do the fourth one tomorrow and see what else there is in this particular sutta about the mindfulness on the body, because it goes on after the fourth one. There's more about the mindfulness on the body. And it's an interesting aspect that the Buddha has put particular emphasis on the body. And if you examine that, why, you will find that when you look at yourself, that's me. Everybody knows exactly what they look like and who me is. And what is that? That's body. that then all the other stuff arises too, which has to do with mind, is taken for granted. First, this has to be me. If this is me, all the rest of the stuff isn't me either. So this is our very first process of identification. Even though everybody knows they're going to die, makes no difference. Just ask anybody whether they're going to die, and they're going to say, yes, that's a stupid question, of course I'm going to die. And what are they going to do about it? Nothing. Not a thing. The identification process remains. And this is why the Buddha put so much emphasis on this attention and investigation through those insight methods on the body, which, as you can see, lead us to the jhanas just like anything else, depending on what sort of inclination the mind has. Some people do have that inclination for investigation into these insight methods. Other people have the inclination to just stay on the breath. Whichever one, doesn't matter. Are there any questions? Everything perfectly clear? That's wonderful. So we can all do it, obviously, also. Maybe. Please put the attention on the breath for just a few moments. Let love and compassion arise in your heart. The warmth of love, the caring of compassion. Feel those two in yourself, for yourself. Now let the warmth of love and the care of compassion reach out to everyone here. Fill everyone from head to toe with those feelings coming from your heart. And now let the warmth and tenderness of love and the care and understanding of compassion reach out to all your loved ones. Fill them and surround them with these feelings from your heart. Let the sweet feeling of love and the protective feeling of compassion reach out to all your friends and relations. Filling them and embracing them with these feelings from your heart. Now think of all the people you've ever known or seen anywhere at all. And reach out to them with the same feeling of love and compassion as you have for your loved ones. Try not to make any difference. Fill them and surround them with a completeness coming from your heart. Now let the warmth of your love and the feeling of togetherness, of compassion, grow and expand. Pour out of your heart in an ever-widening stream. Touching people near and far. giving the gift from your heart as far as it will reach. Now direct those same feelings towards yourself. Be filled and surrounded by them. Feeling at ease and well. Protected and safe. May beings everywhere have love and compassion for each other.